Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. My name's Phil. Joining me as usual, I have Rohan. How's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. And joining us today, we're always pleased to have him back on the show, is Paulus. Hey, Paulus.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Living the dream.
Living the dream in lockdown, right? Like, in
That's
isolation.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant project. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with any router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
Paulus, big announcement this week from Nabu Casa and Home Assistant was that you've acquired ESPHome.
Yeah.
I saw this on Twitter and I'm like, wait, what? Acquire? Like, it was like it sounds like, you know, like when a big company's bought another little company and, you know, obviously that was sort of what you're going on, but this is all open source, right? This generally, you don't hear much of this sort of stuff happening. So, yeah. Can you run us through, like...
The ESPHome was started by Otto like 3 years ago, and it was really just to kind of complement Home Assistant in a way that, like, those, you know, the ESP chips are super cheap from China. There's these microcontrollers. You can program them with anything you want. Like, you can buy any component that you know of in other devices, like temperature sensors, motion sensors, infrared LEDs, e-ink screens, anything you can think of, you can buy separately, and then you can connect it to ESPHome. And with ESPHome, you can just write a configuration.yaml file, basically.
Yeah.
That you say, hey, I have connected this sensor to this part of this microcontroller, and then that ESPHome will just make it available to Home Assistant. And so ESPHome has been just really good in providing, like all the, you know, Home Assistant is the brains, and then ESPHome is pretty much all the devices that are in your house. It can pretty much replace with the stuff you make yourself. And when you make it yourself, you can put in, you know, all the logic or whatever you feel like. And it really allows people to explore, tinker, like it's the whole do-it-yourself world. And ESPHome and Home Assistant, they work so well together because ESPHome has its own API based on like Google Protobuf, which is very efficient. Mm-hmm. And Home Assistant just tightly integrates with this. So Home Assistant will find ESPHome nodes when they are connected to the network, and then we'll set up direct connection. So every change in ESPHome is immediately pushed to Home Assistant. And so it's been, you know, if you use ESPHome and you don't use Home Assistant yet, within a month or two, you're using Home Assistant. And so it has always been really a great addition to Home Assistant. I always like saw it as like a sister project kind of because of this. Mm-hmm. And together with ESPHome, we kind of cover the whole house. But ESPHome was created by Otto when, you know, he's been on the podcast, I think as well, a couple of years ago.
I'm just looking it up. He was on episode 28 when ESPHome was called ESPHome Lib. And he's really young, right? I remember on the episode, Rohan and I were like, well...
He was in high school, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, he was in high school.
Yeah, crazy, right? And everyone were like, oh, well, you've achieved more than we have, and, you know...
That's right.
Yeah, and so, when he went to university, and everything was just a lot busier, right? I think there's just a lot of pressure at university, and he's going to European university, so it's a bit more serious than the American college life and movies. And so, you know, it was not really good to combine anymore. And it was, what was happened is that, like, he built everything, he held all the keys, and they were contributors, and they were able to do releases, but they were just getting some decisions that had to be made from time to time. Is this a good addition? Does it fit with the architecture? Does it right? And those decisions were not being made. And, you know, the people in the ESPHome community were like, okay, what's going on? What's the future of this project, right? There was a lot of uncertainty. But also for Otto itself, he felt bad because, you know, he had this burden on him. And, you know, he was not able to do anything with it. And so, this is where, like, we stepped in. Like, we've seen this obviously happen. And we very much care about ESPHome. And so... we decided to step in. We started talking with Otto, like, what can we do? And this was the best solution we came to. And so, Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit weird, like acquiring an open source project.
Yeah.
But it's really meant just to, we're not going to commercialize it like you need a Nabu Casa subscription to use ESPHome, because that will never work.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's not the goal either. It's we really see it that people that use ESPHome are going to be heavier Home Assistant users, and so are just more likely also to help support the Home Assistant project by subscribing to Nabu Casa.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Right.
And I think also we're obviously going to invest more in ESPHome. So we're also, we've hired someone to work on ESPHome. So that person is going to start probably in a month from now. It's Jesse Hills, also known as Jesse Rocks. He's one of the ESPHome core developers now already. And so he's going to work full time on ESPHome. And I mean, we have a lot of ideas to make things easier, even easier than they already are. I think one of the things that I personally really want to see is that, ESPHome makes it really easy to create things, but configuration of Wi-Fi is always a pain. Because what happens, I mean, we see this with IoT devices across the world is that are Wi-Fi based. You buy them, you have to connect to the access point to configure it, right? So, and both iOS and Android make this quite difficult. So the reason it's difficult, like you have to go to settings, to Wi-Fi, to access points, find the access point that starts with like ESPHome _ or whatever the name of the device is. And then, phones will also tell you, this internet connection has no, this Wi-Fi connection has no internet, so I'm not going to use it. It
kicks you off.
And then when you configure your Wi-Fi, the device has to take its access point down to actually try to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So there's no error handling anymore, because once there's no way to tell you, hey, it failed, because you're no longer connected to the device, because you're on a different Wi-Fi network now, or disconnected. And so one of the things that we're actually working on, Jesse and I were actually already together working on this before the acquisition, but we want to accelerate it now, is that we're working on a Bluetooth low energy based Wi-Fi provisioning API.
Yep.
So we see this, of course, in like more modern devices. They will add Bluetooth just so that the app can connect to it and pass on the Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So that way you also have error handling, because the Bluetooth connection can stay connected while it tries to connect to Wi-Fi, for example.
Yeah.
And so actually there's a bunch of proprietary APIs out there, and we want to build an open one. So we're already, we designed draft 1. We're now working on draft 2, based on some feedback. But we've also already got like opt-in from like other projects. So the WLAT firmware is also interested in adding this support for it.
That's a good idea.
And so the idea would be that every ESP32, because ESP8266 does not have Bluetooth, but ESP32 has.
Right. So
every ESP32 based open firmware could in theory add support for this Bluetooth standard. And then, we'll have our prototype now uses actually a website in Chrome with like web Bluetooth to provision devices. But we're going to add it to the Home Assistant app, and other projects can use it to their apps. But then there's just a generic standard just to get things online and get it into our home.
Right. Interesting.
So that's another thing that we're working on, and it's going to come soon.
So really at the end of the day, I mean, this is about taking the project, putting like a formal kind of architecture around it, or former, I guess if you want to call it a review board kind of around it, right? Just to say, okay, here's where we want to go. Here's what wants to happen, and then let's build a roadmap based on user input or whatever.
Yeah, I think that the goal has been really just to to get the project going again. I think there's been some. I think we really, especially with a full-time employee, things are gonna move really fast, and I think also, for Nabu Casa, it's easier to have full-time employees invest in projects that we control than we don't, right? So with Home Assistant, obviously, we control it, and with ESPHome now as well. And I think we can really make it a tight integration. And it's also, I mean, it also wouldn't have been fair to have a full-time employee in ESPHome and then have Otto in his spare time review or like give feedback. Like it doesn't work like that.
That seems fair.
So yeah, I'm really stoked. I think there's going to be so many cool things. And I hope that, as we make it easier for people to create and share ESPHome-based projects, I hope that can become like a viable alternative to just, buying things from wherever. It's like, no, I see this like, I see this maker like selling his own devices that are like way cooler than other devices out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we saw this with the tech reader, right?
That's right, yeah.
Adorno created last year.
And that's where I was sort of going to lead with my next question is this a sort of play where you would want to start heading towards in that you've started, you've got the Home Assistant tag reader now, which is a physical device that people can, 3D print and buy the parts themselves or get one pre-made. We also saw last year at the conference, you announced Home Assistant Blue with, a fully incorporated device. Now you've just acquired ESPHome. It's sort of, from an outsider's view, it looks like you are starting to head in towards the devices. Is there long-term plans that you're thinking about or, that you would like to head to one day in being able to create, open source door sensors that people can print off or you can sell directly under your brand?
Well, I think that with Home Assistant, it's always we're better in creating the platform and the surrounding, and we're not focused on capturing all the value ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We want other people to create and sell ESPHome based products because we know that if they do that, it integrates perfectly in Home Assistant, right? So like ESPHome works with MQTT and you can do all those other things, but that requires work, right? Yeah. You need to like configure your MQTT broker and topics, etc., etc. And all, but Home Assistant just works out of the box. And as we invest more in ESPHome, and I really hope that we can create firmwares for things and then people can just start creating and selling it. I don't think that we as Home Assistant or Nabu Casa have to be the sole company selling these products. In fact, I want more people to just be invested and work with it and just make it the best platform there is. And I think that has been our approach at Home Assistant as well. I think, the Home Assistant Blue really was just to make it more accessible. I think what we saw is we've spent so many years in making things easier to use and getting onboarding perfect, discovery going, configuration is easy. But then the first step to get started was, download this image and flash it to an SD card. And it was like, that makes no sense. Yeah. That's completely the opposite of all the other steps. So that's where I think Home Assistant Blue came in, and it's been a success, but there's so much shortage right now in the market for components. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so there's a big issue actually with just creating the Odroid N2 Plus on which the Home Assistant Blue is based off. And so that has been our biggest problem. It's actually hard kernel said that for some pieces, it can take up to like 30 weeks lead time now for them to source their components. And it's only getting bigger because, all product creators in the world are just fighting around the same pieces.
Yep, exactly. The semiconductor shortage is basically just smacked the entire market pretty hard in the face, right? So it's tough.
Yeah, and that's... I think that's, when you look at the Home Assistant Blue, we're working on creating more. Our responsibility in that process is really the case, right? That's all we do. Well, and the software, right? But the software works. So the case is easy to produce. Yeah. Now that the systems are in place. We did just change a little bit to the case. So our first batch, we had the front and back plate was chrome. So it was kind of shiny, reflective. Mm-hmm. And we're now going to brushed aluminium because we had a bunch of quality issues. The problem with chrome is that it's very sensitive. So not just scratches, even also like bubbles of air in it will show up as like specks that are not reflecting. So we had a high amount of, like parts that got like disqualified. Yeah. And so, but this has been such a learning experience for us. This was the first time dealing with like Chinese manufacturers, getting something manufactured to begin with, right? And so we just focused on a case.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It's been fun.
You guys get to be the next metal experts now on, on how all this stuff works too, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I think if we do something next, it will not be metal, just because, we probably want to add a radio to it.
Sure.
And right now, of course, it's all aluminium, so that was not a solution.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of ESPHome, it is, obviously been an open source project. It can, as you said, works with MQTT. I'm sure there's other, open source home automation platforms that, integrate with ESPHome. Does the Nabu Casa acquisition, is that going to change its focus, away from being, supported by, for example, OpenHab, Domotics or whatever? Is that something that you're conscious of, that have you thought about?
No, I mean, we're not going to break any API that's already there. I think that the people that are working on ESPHome from Nabu Casa, they're going to focus, of course, on extending the official API so that if Home Assistant needs it, they're not going to add extra APIs to have other platforms extract the data in other ways. But it's open source, so anyone can add that if they want. We're not going to block it.
Yeah.
This has been the same inside Home Assistant as well, right? We don't block data exports, or we don't hold your data hostage. We want people to use it. We want people to experience it. And the way I see it is that if OpenHab would integrate with ESPHome, the better, because more ESPHome devices will be created.
Yep.
And then there will be more investment in the platform.
Yeah.
I think that, Home Assistant just has the advantage in the open source home automation world, is that we actually have found a way of funding our open source development that works and that sticks. Where, I think all other projects, they don't really have a funding or full-time employees. And as you get bigger and more things are happening, it's just, there's just so much work that we're doing every day just to keep the project going without actually building anything ourselves, because all the things around us are constantly changing.
Yeah.
Not just the, of course, the IoT products and the protocols we need to update to, but also just our infrastructure for building the images. And now we're on GitHub Actions. It used to be Azure, and all those build pipelines.
You have to have them maintained, build them.
Yeah. If you look at the hardware that we support, every platform that we add support for needs ongoing maintenance, pretty much, right? So we we try to stick to the upstream kernel as much, like the original Linux kernel. And that's also, for example, for Home Assistant Blue, we actually worked with Bay Libre, which was a kernel consultancy firm, to actually fix a bunch of bugs and have it upstreamed. So when we use the upstream Linux kernel, it all works. So we don't have to maintain our own patches and these kind of things.
Wow. Okay. It's crazy how much of a multiplier effect, an open source project like Home Assistant can have, right? Just again, now you're starting to make bug fixes on Linux kernels and things like that. That can affect other stuff too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, and it also feels good to contribute back in it's, of course we're open source, so it feels like we're obviously already contributing a lot to technology and the world, I feel, by making it very accessible. But we still rely on a lot of open source. I think all of Linux that we rely on, and then all those Python packages that we rely on. Python itself, there's so much stuff, and just to be able to give back to those communities as well is great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, from this point then, so again, we've taken on ESPHome. What's kind of the direction you're taking it outside of? So I know you talked about some of the things you want to do and that kind of stuff. But from a direct integration to Home Assistant, are there going to be a bunch of improvements coming from there, outside of the joining Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff? What else is there, or is there any other plans? Are you planning on keeping them as two separate? Hey, you're an ESPHome developer, and you don't touch Home Assistant unless it's on your free time, and then how does that work too? Is there?
Okay, well, that's actually two questions you're asking now, but let me start with the
two very different questions.
Yeah, so the first part is the integration with ESPHome is already very solid. I think that there's the room for improvement is very little, because an ESPHome node comes online on the Wi-Fi. Home Assistant will already detect it and ask the user, do you want to integrate it?
Yeah.
But there is, for example, a add-on for if you run Home Assistant OS or Home Assistant Supervised that will help you flash ESPHome devices. So this add-on will, you upload your YAML file, it will compile it, and you can flash it either over the air. And that's something that, that add-on will be brought into the official organization instead of being like a standalone repository.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of more, I think there's not much more integration possible right now. I think it's not, at least not from what I can think of right now.
Sure.
I think actually, talking about the add-on, there's also another sidetrack. Chrome and Edge just declared stable the Web Serial API.
Okay.
So it means that we can start flashing ESP devices from the browser.
Ooh, okay.
With ESPHome. So this whole add-on is almost not necessary anymore.
Interesting. So Home Assistant natively can use that Web Serial API.
Yeah, or a static website. Like you could literally, for example, have like ESPHome.io/flash, and you go there and you could have like, if you have a ready-made firmware for ESPHome and you connect it through your device through USB, just flash it.
Interesting. So like, let's say, for example, I run mine on Docker and a VM. but I'm using my browser on my laptop that I'm talking to you on right now, plug it into there, and then it uses the Web Serial part or Web Serial interface at that point to flash the, that is really cool.
But it's only needed the first time actually, right? Because ESPHome is smart enough. We do over the air updates.
Yeah. And then after that point, it just goes. But that's even that first time to me, that's great, because right now it's take my laptop there, blah, 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 load the thing, go look up the documentation on how to flash this again. And then, it's just a constant cycle there.
No,
right?
and I think, with Home Assistant, we've been focused on like making it easier. And this is definitely something for ESPHome that, flashing is just like the same with Home Assistant. It's a trickier part. So if we can, that's something we're going to solve. But back to the ESPHome and Home Assistant, I think right now it's already so good. I don't think I can see much steps forward. I know that Otto, he was a Home Assistant core developer before he started ESPHome.
Yeah.
Right? He built ESPHome because he saw a need in his own life. And I think, if an ESPHome developer, they would have to earn their credentials first in Home Assistant. So these two communities are like separate, right? We're not going to merge them. They have their own Discords. We will offer ESPHome a place on the Home Assistant forums, just because forum software is a pain to maintain.
Sure.
And so we're just going to have them have their own sub forum. They can have their own moderators if they want. They have their... we're not going to merge those communities because it wouldn't make sense. These are whole different conversations they're having, right? About like 3.3 versus 5-volt and ground and, and these kind of things. And, right now they have a handful of channels, but that might grow over time. So we wouldn't want that to also be in the Home Assistant Discord. So I think that's fine. They're not going to be merged. They have their own moderators right now already, their own admins. And basically we just, empower them. So, I don't personally write ESPHome code, but like Jesse obviously already is. And then as Nabu Casa employee, he will just continue to build it out and extend it.
That's very cool. So still keeping the communities kind of to their own little, like run themselves kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, or moderate yourself kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the things Jesse is going to work on actually is that a lot of PRs have been open that have not had review because it was just taking a long time.
Sure.
Because there was no one around. And so there's one really cool PR open, and it's called Bluetooth Client. And so this means that as ESPHome devices, it can start connecting to other devices to read out that information and make it available to Home Assistant.
Right.
And so, for example, there was this video online. I don't know if you saw it. It was this guy in England who has connected his Bluetooth toothbrush to the lights. So when he started brushing his teeth, right, or the toothbrush went on, the lights went on. Well, that's something with this Bluetooth client stuff that we can actually build it natively into ESPHome. Instead of like the custom component that he used, it will be able to, that anyone can just configure this in YAML to be able to expose their toothbrush state in Home Assistant. But there's so many things nowadays that are on Bluetooth Low Energy. So barbecue meat thermometer, there was one that was based on Bluetooth. There's this sous vide cooking device that's based on Bluetooth. And all these things that previously were kind of a pain to integrate in the Home Assistant because Bluetooth itself is a pain.
Yeah,
now,
such a pain.
And then your Bluetooth, you don't want your Home Assistant host to be close to your Bluetooth devices because maybe they can be anywhere in the house.
Yeah.
So now you could have small Bluetooth nodes throughout your house based on ESPHome, and then have that sniff in all the data and send to Home Assistant too.
Interesting.
That would replace so many Raspberry Pi Zeros that I have around the house.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's the same for a lot of people too, right? I mean, it's funny because I started going down that route. So I bought myself a little Raspberry Pi Zero and started doing some stuff in there. And then eventually I found ESPHome, but I knew about ESPHome, but I was like, okay, maybe I should try this. And then, and now I've got like 3 ESP32s kicking around the house doing different things. And like, so it is fun, right? Like it's, and I think, it's for the listeners that haven't tried it yet. I mean, it's definitely a cool way to get started into the hardware side of it, right? I mean, that was my kind of first foray into it too. And it is really neat.
Yeah. And it is surprisingly easy. I think that it feels very daunting because people talk about pins and like what is a pin, but then when you see these ESP boards, you're like, oh, that is a pin. And then if you have those breadboards, it's you can connect jumpers. So it's a fun thing. I think it would benefit if we had like some ESPHome starter kit to kind of learn these kind of things, right? To have like an ESP8266 together with an LED, a temperature sensor, and these kind of things.
Sure.
But
That'd be kind of fun, yeah.
I think, it is a lot of fun. And I mean, that's how the tech reader that we did last year, that was something that like, Andrea and we were talking about it online, and then he got a prototype going in ESPHome, and from there on we developed it further and further. And now it's just really cool.
Yeah.
I love these tag readers. Like you just plug them in and bam, it's on your network. Please go ahead, try it. Like it's crazy how simple it is,
That's awesome.
Paulus, before we go, we should say also congratulations on the 1.0 release. It was short-lived.
Yes.
We always bugged you about, your 1.0 release. You finally got there. You changed it at the last minute. But congratulations on the new release schedule and the naming structure too. I think it does show that, the project has definitely evolved a lot and matured along the way. And I think, it's all something that you should be proud of, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was... we were talking about it, like, what is the mythical 1.0? And we're just like, it keeps pushing, the boundaries because they keep, every time, like, this is interesting, this is what we want to have. And in the end, we're like, okay, maybe this is just it. And, I think people also, they had this expectation that come 1.0, we would never, ever have any breaking changes anymore. And the truth is that it's out of our control because we integrate with all these services and they tend to break and we have to adjust and these kind of things. But I mean, we have done a great stride in reducing our breaking changes. I think that generally, if you have a integration that is being set up through a config flow through the UI, it will not have breaking changes anymore.
Yeah,
that's just like that. You no longer have to worry it won't set up. Like, because all of a sudden, a Home Assistant is responsible for the configuration format and for migrating it if changes are necessary.
Yeah.
And so that's been working really well. We put actually this work now on the developer of integration, this burden, and they'll solve it for everybody, right? And we couldn't write to your configuration YAML file in the past because people had these complex structures with include theirs, and we couldn't kind of like trace back where to write. And now this is just with config entries, it's been beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to mention is that there's one feature of Home Assistant Cloud that like is not popular enough in my opinion. So I thought I would highlight it here.
Please.
Yes.
So over a year ago, actually at the last State of the Union, so not the conference, but the year before, we added a text-to-speech API for Home Assistant Cloud users. So this is actually powered by Azure. And so you can have any voice that Azure supports, you can actually have in Home Assistant, and you can have any text, and you just either use your browser or use like a Google Home Mini or any other, or Sonos or any other media player that plays a URL. And you can actually send text-to-speech to it, and it will, read it out loud with like real voices. So we actually have also to kind of promote this feature, we've recently added a tryout dialog in Home Assistant. So if you go to Home Assistant configuration cloud, you go to the text-to-speech section. There you can pick your default language that you want to use if you don't specify one. And then there's a try button. So you can actually hear in the browser, or you can hear on one of your speakers, the voice. And it's actually cool because like I use it also to troll my kids. So because you just type in text and you press play and it starts playing whatever I just wrote. Right. So my kids will, I love it because like I don't have anything pre-programmed in like scripts or something. I just use my phone to like kind of talk to them.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, I think more people should use the text-to-speech stuff.
Absolutely.
It's really cool.
I actually didn't even realize it was a thing. I was actually randomly looking at some documentation and I saw cloud.tts service. I'm like, what is that? And
exactly.
I went in and was like, oh, wow, this is cool. And I actually just changed it to use that. And the voices are, I was previously using like the Google Translate API, right? The voices are much more naturally sounding. And my wife goes, oh, why is your different voice now? And then it was moved on, right? Like, that's it, right? But
there you go.
No, definitely. I'm very pleased with just the quality of the TTS. Much more natural.
Yeah, so these are not, there's two different types of doing text-to-speech. So the original kind of approach used to be that they know how a language pronounces things. So they know that, if there's a vowel here or something like pronounce it like this, if there's an A before a B, then that's how it should be pronounced. But you could only get so far, and it always sounds pretty monotone. And that's kind of the Google Translate voice. And these are the cheap text-to-speech APIs. But the one that we offer with Home Assistant Cloud is the newer model. It's based on neural networks. So it takes more data to train, and it's more intensive to run, right? You need like a GPU to calculate it on the fly. But they sound so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like one of us talking or whatever, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So that's something that like I'm really stoked that we are able to offer. And I think that's also like, when we think about like Home Assistant Cloud, it's like, no, together we're all paying so we can have access to these APIs so that we don't all have to individually subscribe. Because you can set up your own Azure and like, do all that stuff, but it's just a lot of work.
But then you have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I highly recommend anyone that's got a Nabu Casa subscription, get on it straight away.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you don't have a Nabu Casa subscription, you should get one.
You should definitely get one.
$5 a month. Best $5 a month you'll spend.
Yes. Well,
honestly,
and now
I agree.
And now it will also fund the development of ESPHome. So I think that's going to be
which is
even better bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Paulus, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for waking up early. We really appreciate it. It's always fun talking to you. We love getting to find out the secret stuff that's coming up. All right.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Have a good day, guys. Thank you.
Cheers.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.